What if you had a guide who could tell you how to bridge a gap between who you are today and who you're destined to be? What if each week you could hear a story of someone who has tried and succeeded, or perhaps tried and failed, but learned something in the process? Limitless Spirit is a weekly podcast where host Helen Todd interviews guests about topics and personal stories on defining life's purpose, pursuing personal growth, and developing a deeper faith in Christ.
Welcome to Limitless Spirit, the podcast that seeks to inspire and empower you to live for a greater purpose. I'm your host, Helen Todd, and today we're going to talk about the role of Christian women in the workplace and the challenges we face in balancing our careers, family life, and spiritual journey. In today's episode, I talk with Chelsea Patterson Sobolik, who lives in Washington, D.C. She's an author and also has a very fast-paced career as the director of government relations for a nonprofit organization. And more recently, she stepped into motherhood as her and her husband adopted a baby boy from India. We are going to explore the unique perspectives and insights that Christian women bring to their professional lives and what is a healthy way to navigate motherhood and career without compromising your relationship with God. So grab a cup of coffee, settle into a comfortable space, and let's embark on this journey together. Hi, Chelsea. Welcome to the Limitless Spirit podcast. How are you today?
I'm well. Thanks so much for having me.
I know it must be a very busy, happy and busy time in your life as you just recently returned from India after you and your husband adopted your son. And so being a new mom is not easy. So
lots of coffee
How
involved.
are you handling this?
Oh my goodness. No, we are absolutely thrilled. So we welcomed our son home through international adoption. And international adoption is actually very near and dear to my family. I was actually adopted internationally when I was little. So it's such a pleasure to get to welcome our son home, but also have something in common with his story. So we're good. We've been home less than a month, so we're definitely still bonding and adjusting and settling in as a family of three. But we've been drinking lots of coffee because we've had some sleepless nights. But we're
can
doing well.
imagine.
Yes.
So I'm curious, and your son being in like 2.5 and he's already communicative. Do you have any language barrier?
Yeah, so we adopted him from northern India, and they spoke Hindi in his part of India. So he's learning some English words. We learned a little bit of Hindi, but it's amazing how much you can communicate without words, whether it's facial expressions or, whatnot. So he's definitely learning English, but we're able to communicate pretty well, but there is a language barrier right now. But thankfully, little people soak up language much quicker than big people.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Actually, this is the best time for him to learn the language. A little harder for you to learn Hindi, but for him to learn English, this is the most perfect time.
Yes.
So he's going to be talking in no time.
Yes.
But I was just wondering, I think raising a toddler, you have a communication barrier, even if you speak the same language.
Yes.
They just have the mind of their own. But this puts you really in a very unique position, as we're going to talk about your recent book called To Cultivate, a Gospel Vision for Women and Work. And I really was excited to talk to you as your book came across my desk, because I think, as women and women who work, we face some unique challenges. And I think this book is very timely, and hopefully it's going to answer some questions or inspire some of our listeners in their walk with Christ and their career. So let's start with what really prompted you to even write this book.
It's a great question. So this book was born out of my own personal experience in the workplace. I'm in my mid-30s and actually just now stepping into motherhood, which some women step into motherhood much earlier than I do. But my first book is actually about my story with infertility. But because I'm stepping into motherhood a little bit later, I have had, dozen plus years of professional experience. And I was working on Capitol Hill. I studied foreign policy in school, moved to DC, and was working on Capitol Hill for a member of Congress who at the time I had so much respect for, and really it was my dream job. I was getting to work on public policy issues that I cared about and loved it. Unfortunately, he resigned in the middle of the Me Too movement because of some things he did that he shouldn't have done. And what that did was on Capitol Hill, when a member of Congress leaves, the staff loses their job because they're working for that member of Congress and the people of that district. So he resigned, and then we all lost our jobs. And so I was in this place of walking through something very difficult professionally as a Christian and as a woman, and kind of realizing, hey, there's not that many books on the bookshelves that talk about Christian women in the workplace. And so I wrote the book I wish I'd had at the time, kind of navigating some of those questions I had of what do I do when I walk into a room and hear women gossiping about me? Or what do I do when I experience gender discrimination in the workplace? And so this book really, there's incredible books out there on calling, vocation, work, all of that. But I didn't see that many tied to questions I was wrestling with as a Christian woman in the workplace. So I was really born out of my own wrestlings and my own questions and my own research. But my hope and desire and prayer is that every Christian woman who's working, which is all of us, because some of us work in the home, some of us work outside the home, and some of us do a combination of the two. My hope is that it will really empower Christian women, to think well about their work and well about how we should work, why we should work, answering some of those questions that I think we really should pause and ponder, because we spend about a third of our lives working. So it's something we should think well about.
So let's talk about, working outside of the home. So there is a view out there that a Christian woman should not work outside the home, and that once a woman gets married, she should devote her life to serving her family and working at home and raising children and taking care of home. And sometimes, which it's nice if your financial situation allows that and if that's something you want to do. But for some women, it's not an option. So even if they want to be a stay-at-home mom or wife, they have to work outside the home. And in that case, they may feel guilty about that. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's a great question. And I think it's a question that people of good faith have wrestled with for a long time. What I would say is a couple of things. Number one, I don't offer an answer to this question in the book because, frankly, there is no answer, because our lives look so different. My life looks very different than yours, than your listeners. And so I think it's really important for us to seek wisdom for our particular situation and season of life. And I love the concept of seasons. I write a lot about this in the book, because just as the world experiences 4 seasons, or some places in the world experience, summer, winter, fall, spring, our lives go in seasons. And so, like I said, I'm in my mid-30s stepping into motherhood. I know you have listeners who are probably 21 and just got married and already pregnant. And so our lives will look very different. And so what works for me might not work for someone else. But like you said, some women don't have the option to stay home financially. I've personally experienced this. So I think what's important is to pray and seek God's wisdom for our particular situation. Invite counsel, maybe sit down with your pastor. And then I think something that we need to think through too is maybe in this particular season, we can't afford financially to stay home, but that season might not last for 10 years. And so thinking through the situation that the Lord has entrusted me with for now. And so he's going to be faithful to what he's called us to. And our financial situation did not surprise the Lord. And so if you need to work and you might not want to, it's hard. I get it. It's really hard. It's not ideal, but I would say to trust the Lord in that this situation didn't surprise him and that we can trust him to take care of us. And I think it's helpful to remember our calling is to be faithful. And so if faithfulness looks like right now in this season, working outside the home, that is what we need to do faithfully. So again, I try not to answer that question in the book of here's kind of a 5-step answer to that question, just because I think wisdom should undergird so much in those types of decisions. And I do want to say, again, very clearly, it's hard. Life is sometimes trade-offs and we can't have everything we want at the same time. And, if you are in that situation and you don't want to work outside the home, but you need to trust the Lord with that, ask him to give you the desires of your heart to allow you to stay home if you want to. But, in the evenings or the mornings or the weekends, really, really prioritize those times that you're able to be with family.
Well, I think this is an excellent answer because everything in life most likely is not the way that we wanted to
Yes.
dream of or imagine. And it's about finding the beauty in the season you're in, because God is not surprised by your season, and there is a reason why he's taking you through this time. Well, on the other end of the spectrum are women who are very passionate about career and have dreams, aspirations in a certain field. And when it comes into the reality of, also being a wife and a mother, there is a tremendous amount of guilt. That is, I've lived through that because my work is ministry. So it's, I'm serving the Lord as my career, but at the same time, I raised 2 children and there was so much guilt. I think womanhood is ridden with guilt,
Yes.
especially motherhood. And there was always that guilt. I had to travel internationally and leave my kids behind sometimes. And so what would you tell women who feel guilty about being passionate or loving their careers?
I love this question because I love to work. I've loved what I've gotten to do professionally. I've had some incredible opportunities. I've, in some ways had the highs and the lows. I was actually talking about this with my husband recently over dinner. I'm on maternity leave through the rest of this year and then start back in January. We're figuring out what that's going to look like. And I was telling him, I already feel this guilt, and I can only imagine, women who have multiple children or women who have been in this much, much longer. But I was also telling Michael, I want my son to grow up seeing me loving him well, loving my husband well, but also I work still in public policy on behalf of refugee populations right now. And I want my son to grow up seeing that I care deeply for my family. And when I am there, he has my full attention and I love him well. I also want him to see that his mom cares about vulnerable people around the world. And I want him to see what it looks like to work hard for others. And, we might not all work with vulnerable populations. Work might be a barista at a coffee shop or something like that. So there might be some roles that might be a little less of a direct line to how work is impacting the world. But, as a barista, you interact with people every single day and you have that opportunity to show the love and the light of Christ. So of course my family is important to me, but I also want to train my son that his mom and dad care about things outside of the walls of our house, and home is incredibly important. I want it to be the most beautiful place for my son, but also there's so much happening outside the walls of our house that I want to teach him how to be a good citizen, how to care well for those that, don't have what we have, how to love and to work hard. And so for women who might feel guilty for leaving or for going to work, or for, maybe I feel guilty that I do care about my job as much as I do, I would say that, things are always in tension. We're always holding multiple cares and desires together. I think that's one of the things with women is when a woman steps into wife and motherhood, things do look different. Men go back to work and it's always expected that they'll go back to work. But for women, if you want to go back to work, people might question that or not understand. But I think I would encourage women who fall on that end of the spectrum that God gave you those desires, and everything we do is teaching our children something, hopefully something about God. And God worked, God works, God calls humans to work with excellence and diligence and all of that. And so I would consider the lessons that you want to teach your children beyond the walls of your home.
And let's throw this in there. If you read Proverbs 31, it's nowhere it said that she only worked inside her house. She was quite involved in many ventures very successfully. And to me, this is just the example of a woman who has it all. A great career, a great family, a great house. And I'm not sure where this notion came that women are called, a godly woman is only called to work inside her house. I'm like you, I'm very passionate about what I do, and I feel like it's not just a career, it's a service to the Lord. And so, I mean, I never struggled with that. I did struggle with, not being with my kids all the time of their lives.
Well, I would say too, when churches or when we hold up the height of womanhood or the godliest type of woman as wife and mother, that excludes so many faithful women in the church and in history, because God does not call every woman to step into to being a wife or a mother. And those are godly, God-ordained roles. But when we hold those things up as the godliest thing a woman can ever do, it's not true. It's not true in Scripture, because the most important thing about us as women is love God, love neighbor. We can do that in any season, in any circumstance. We don't have to be married or have children to do that. And so I prize these two roles, but God doesn't call every woman into those or as quickly as we'd like or all of those things. And so I do think it is detrimental to our single sisters and our childless sisters when we talk about wife and mother as the godliest thing someone can step into. So I'm really glad you said that.
I agree with this very much. And so now that we have established that it's perfectly fine for a godly woman to seek a career outside of her household, let's talk about some of the challenges that a woman and specifically a Christian woman in the workplace faces. So you mentioned that you have experienced gender discrimination at the workplace. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So, like I said, I shared my story about working on Capitol Hill and losing my job, but there's also, and that's a pretty extreme example. There's certainly women who walk through things like that, situations that are much, much worse. I would also say I've also experienced things in the workplace where it's almost assumed that women will check their femininity at the door of the workplace and then just act like a man at the workplace. And if you don't, I've been excluded from conversations or, just smaller things, but it's because I'm a woman in the workplace, or, men will say things to me that they might not say to my male counterparts. Another component that I write about in the book, and I include other voices on this topic, is racial discrimination. I know so many women have experienced both racial discrimination and gender discrimination in the workplace, both of which in US law are illegal, but it still happens all the time. And so, for women who are experiencing one or the other or both, I would remind them that it is illegal. So if you're experiencing something like that, I would immediately go to HR. I think I write about this in the book, but that can sound like very, almost obvious advice. But so many women actually don't go to HR because they're afraid of being retaliated against or of being, a snitch or all these different things. I've walked with friends who are experiencing experienced gender discrimination in the workplace, and I've personally gone with them to HR. And so if you're experiencing a situation that you know is not right, but you're afraid to report that up, I would say talk to a pastor, talk to, a good girlfriend or even a guy friend who would be willing to sit in that conversation with you, or hold your arms up as you're navigating that. Something that really touched my heart as I was watching my boss, this man I'd respected, and I think we can all, unfortunately, there's so many Christian leaders who have fallen over the past few years. Men we held in high esteem, and it was found out that their character was not what they portrayed. As I was watching that and really, really discouraged, I read through the Gospels and saw Jesus's treatment of women. And it was so helpful for my soul to remember that my boss's treatment of women, so many other men's treatment of women, is not godly. It's wrong. It's sinful. And it seems so obvious to say that. Of course, it's sinful to mistreat a woman anytime, anywhere. But so often people get away with it, or the consequences aren't what they should be. But as I was reading through the Gospels again during that time of my life, seeing Jesus's completely countercultural treatment of women and how he spoke to them, how he interacted with them, how he included them in the grand gospel narrative. Women were the first at the tomb. Women were there every step of the way. It was encouraging for me to remember that Christ set the example, and Christ cares about women, even when I've been mistreated, even when we've been not treated as we ought to as women, that's wrong. That's not okay. We should push back against that, but also remembering that Christ doesn't treat me that way as a woman. Christ cares about women in such a revolutionary way that the world doesn't. And so fixing my eyes on Christ in those moments when I've been slighted or I've been hurt or I've been mistreated is helpful, because I remember Christ is perfect and Christ will love me God made me as a woman. He will care about me as a woman. And as a woman, I can use my voice to push back against the darkness wherever I see it, whether it's in the US and women are being mistreated here, or around the world where women are being mistreated simply because they're women.
So let's talk about another challenge that women face in the workplace, and is often feeling like their work doesn't really matter. Like it's meaningless, it's menial, nobody's going to live or die because of what they do, that they're not being seen, when they're doing a good job and putting all their heart into it. So do you address some of these issues in your book?
I do. And I love this question because I have felt this way. There was one job I had where I cried on my way to work every day for about 6 months. My boss was very unkind to me with his words. And I, wasn't doing work that I enjoyed at all. But at the time, I needed to help pay the bills for our family. So I get it. I really do. And, there's so many women, whether we're changing diapers in the home, and that's our work right now. And we feel like all of the work we do at the home is undone every day. We have to clean again. We have to do laundry, all these things. Or you might be stocking shelves at a Walmart and feeling like, how on earth is this glorifying the Lord and helping love my neighbor? I'll say several things. Number one, and this has encouraged me in so many moments of my life, God sees everything. Nothing is hidden from the Lord. Those unseen moments, those unseen labors where maybe you're caring for an aging parent, or you're sending an email that, someone's going to pick apart with a pen, tear it apart, or whatever that work is that you just think, Lord, I don't enjoy this. I don't understand this. I'm doing this because it's what I have to do, but I don't like it. That work is not wasted. That work is not in vain, because so many times in my personal life, it's been in those more hidden seasons of life where God really, really strips me of my comforts, of what I think is successful, and really starts to work on my heart. And so I would remember, if you're in that season, God sees that work and it is not in vain. And then I think the second thing as Christians, as we're reorienting our vision for work and what successful work looks like, Christians are called, I think we are called to work hard with excellence. We should strive for success, but working hard and wanting to be excellent in our work does not always equal success. So our calling, again, I do believe we should work hard with excellence, but our ultimate calling is for faithfulness. And so, again, depending on your season of life, strive for faithfulness. And remember, this has helped me in those jobs where I just bang my head against a wall. Everything we do at a workplace or in home or in all of life is telling the watching world something about Christ. And in that job that I mentioned where I cried every day when I went to work, I was one of the only Christians that I knew of. And I had so many opportunities to pour into my coworkers. We would be walking to get lunch and a conversation would start about why I worked differently or why I didn't gossip or why I didn't get drunk on Friday nights or things like that. And I had so many opportunities to share the good news of my hope and why I could choose to be faithful in this unseen labor. And so God doesn't waste anything. No season, even those seasons that feel barren, no season is wasted in God's economy. And so I would just encourage that woman, if you're feeling unseen or taken advantage, none of my work matters, all of this, it does matter to God's kingdom. It matters today because you stocking those shelves at Walmart is helping love your neighbor by making sure there's food there. It's helping the world run. But ultimately, it is, you have the opportunity to point others to God. We're ambassadors of Christ. So that means everything we do and say is telling the world bits and pieces about God's character, what he cares about, who he loves, how he loves. And so nothing is wasted and nothing is in vain.
So I want us to talk about the concept of Sabbath rest. I shared with you that, as my children were young and I was dealing with balancing my professional life and my home life by just making sure that I do it all. And, now looking back, I realized that, yes, I did it all, but it was sometimes at the expense of my personal well-being, even physical well-being. Yes, you can do it all, but something gets sacrificed. And so I'm only right now at this point in my life and learning about the importance of rest, and Sabbath and taking it literally, not as just spiritual Sabbath, and in my relationship with God, but physical rest and the importance of that. So what are your thoughts on that? How should women in a very fast-paced world and a very busy life can find that time?
I would say
why it's important.
Yes. Christians ought to view time differently because in the very first pages of Scripture, we obviously see God at work. We also see God cease his work. And he didn't have to. He did not get tired. We know that God never sleeps. But what he was doing when he worked 6 days and rested the seventh was modeling in the very fabrics of how he created the world and set it up to run. He's modeling and teaching humans how they ought to structure their lives and their time. This question of, can we have it all? Can we do it all? I mean, I can't. I certainly can't. And that's where I love the concept of seasons because, like I said, I'm stepping into motherhood. Something has to give because I need sleep. So our house might be messier right now, and that's okay. But we have built into the fabric daily Sabbaths, little daily Sabbaths when we sleep. All of us need sleep. All of us go to bed. And then I think we should set aside at least a day a week. It doesn't necessarily have to be Sunday, but a day a week to not work as much as possible. Of course, we still have to feed ourselves and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's important because, at least for me, what it does is not only give me physical rest, mental rest, all of that, it also is doing something to my soul, which is reminding me that I'm not limitless. And there have been times where I have stayed up way too late trying to cram in more and more, or I haven't observed a regular day of rest. And I'm teaching myself when I do that I'm a god. I'm limitless. And of course we know that that's not true. We are not like God in that way. And I've actually had several big burnouts when I've done that. And so I've had to restructure my life in a way that I have that rest so that I can sustain the work I want to do for the long term. But it teaches me, and I think regularly ceasing from work and saying, I don't know about you, my to-do list most days is longer at the end of the day than the beginning. And it can be very frustrating to feel like I've worked and worked and worked, and there's still so much to do. And when we get there, it's a choice. We can choose to keep working. And, there might be extreme situations where we have to keep working. But most days, everything on our to-do list that we didn't get done will be just fine until the next day. And we can choose to say, I've worked hard. I've been faithful to what God has called me to in this day. Now I'm choosing to rest. Now I'm choosing that while I go to sleep or while I take a Sunday off, that God's going to sustain the world. And so I think a regular Sabbath does two things. It teaches us that we are not limitless. I need that reminder. And number two, it ought to remind us of God's power and sufficiency and strength. Because as the hymn goes, he's got the whole world in his hands. And I think we can often place burdens on our back that were never meant to be there. We're not meant to carry the world. He is. And I think remembering we can work hard and rest. And when we're resting, maybe your listeners are like me. I do feel guilty, like, I should be working. There's so much to do. But over time, slowly, my heart is learning. It does feel like there's a lot to do. But God is sustaining everything. I'm replaceable. The world would be just fine without my work. I'm thankful the Lord invites me to participate, but I am replaceable. But God is sustaining everything. And those two reminders for me, I need them daily. I really do. But those two things, I think, are helpful as I reorient my mind, but then reorient my body around what is true of what I want to be true in my spirit, that I trust God, and sometimes submitting my body to rest, even when I don't feel like it or feel like I want to keep working. It feels like an act of trust. Rest does not come naturally for me. It feels like a huge act of trust when I step back.
So we're going to post a link to your book so that our listeners could easily access it. But in conclusion, what would you say to our listeners? What should they hope to learn from your book? Some of the highlights.
I would say your work matters. Throughout human history, from the very first humans, Adam and Eve, throughout human history, women have played such a vital role in the flourishing of their families, their churches, and their communities. In one portion of the book, I outline all the different ways Scripture includes women and highlights women in the Old Testament and the New. But I also highlight some of the vital ways that women have contributed to the flourishing of society. I mentioned we just got back from India. Amy Carmichael, who went to India as a missionary, women like Florence Nightingale, women in the first wave feminist movement, which was not like the feminist movement today, but the first wave, women were very concerned about the impact that alcohol had on society. And we can have a long conversation about, Anyway, we can have a long conversation there, but they pushed against that because they wanted their families to flourish and they wanted their communities to flourish. And so what we're doing right now, whether it's having a podcast conversation, changing a diaper, cooking a meal, being the CEO, making a cup of coffee in a coffee shop, all of the work that God has called us to do matters. It really, really matters because we're participating in what God has designed, the flourishing of the world today And I don't know about you, I turn on the news and there's so much brokenness and darkness and so many people that are not flourishing. But we get to have the tiniest little part in helping the world flourish, whether that's in the walls of our home, outside, or a combination of the two. So our work today matters for today. It really, really does. Even if you don't feel like you're seen or valued or appreciated, God sees you. And then the second thing I would say is our work matters for eternity. What we're doing every single day, work predated the fall. Of course, the fall mars it. What we're doing every day is practicing for eternity. I do think we're going to work in eternity because work is how God originally designed the world before the fall. But every single day, what we do today matters for eternity. And so if you are in that place where you feel like no one sees or values or appreciates your work, remember that what you're doing today will matter not only for today, it does, but for eternity. And so these two things that we're holding, my work matters today, my work can help me love God and love my neighbor, but also my work is going to matter for eternity. Those are very sobering truths for me, especially when I'm tempted to procrastinate or having a really hard day. But they're also beautiful because what we do really matters. And so I would leave listeners with that your work matters and your work is valuable.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, for this conversation. Thank you for your very important book. And I wish you all the best in your journey with motherhood and balancing your motherhood and your professional life. Sounds like you're on a great path. Thank you again for joining.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
When God created Adam and Eve, He gave them a mission to be fruitful and to multiply. And this applies to every aspect of our lives. And as Chelsea mentioned, to every season of our lives. I hope that today's discussion has shed some light on the ways that you can overcome challenges as a woman in a workplace. Remember, you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and God has a purpose for you in every sphere of your life, including your career. Keep seeking His guidance, and may His grace sustain you in all that you do. Thank you for tuning in, and I encourage you to check the link in the show notes and pick up Chelsea's book, and I think that it will be a great blessing for you. The title of the book is Called to Cultivate a Gospel Vision for Women and Work. Now, if we take a step further, being fruitful and multiplying also calls us to be disciples and make disciples across the world. And this is where I encourage you to check out our website, rfwma.org, and find out how you can become involved in the Great Commission and take the gospel message and the hope and the love of Christ to people all across the world. Whether you are a man or a woman, whether you're young or you're older, whether you are working or you're retired, maybe you're a student, you have this opportunity and a calling on your life to make disciples. And so we can get you plugged into this and find out how you can do it through a 10-day mission trip to a country where God is calling you to go. Again, I encourage you to check out our website, rfwma.org, and find out how you can get involved. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, I'm Helen Todd.
Limitless Spirit Podcast is produced by World Missions Alliance. We believe that changed lives change lives. If you want to see your life transformed by Christ's love, or if you want to help those who are hurting and hopeless and discover your greater purpose in serving Christ through short-term missionary work, check out our website, rfwma.org, and find out how to get involved.